Okay. Okay, here we are. Here's the link in case anyone wants it. I'm also hitting recording. Okay, good morning, afternoon, maybe night, everyone. So I'm just here to explain that originally this session was going to be chaired by our friend Olga, but unfortunately she won't be able to attend. So Lucas has kindly accepted to fill in her position, and I'll let you introduce yourself, Lucas, and well, you are in charge now. Good luck.
Thank you, Luis. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are on planet Earth. I have the pleasure to be the moderator in this panel with a very special team of guests, and Dina Hapayeva, who's now in Paris, speaking from Paris. Kostya Miftah, who's in Budapest, right?
No, I'm in Moscow, and my surname is Miftahudinov, not Miftah.
Miftahudinov, yeah, Miftahudinov. And our good friend Leandro Cesar, who is not in Moscow but in Rio, right? So let's begin with Dina. I will give you the floor now. Please, I have to remind you that we have 15 to 20 minutes for each one of you. And then we have a short discussion and then on to the questions from the audience. Dina, you have the word. Dina, are you there?
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
So what I'm saying is that as the world watches the atrocities committed by Russians in Ukraine, including, all kinds of things, deportations of huge numbers of civilians, filtration camps, rape, torture, murder of the civilian population of Ukrainians, which some scholars justifiably call genocidal politics. And I agree to this definition. Many observers and many analysts are asking the same question: how could it happen that Russians not only participate, not only tolerate what's going on, but also participate in atrocities, and some even support this politics? And as you all certainly know, quite often the kind of the cult of the Second World War and what I call Restalinization, this memory politics, which aims at promoting the Soviet experience as a very good memories of the Soviet citizens, which aims at promoting Stalin as a victor in the Second World War, and which also kind of claims that Russians are a messianic nation because they rescued the world from fascism. And actually, there was the whole, and I'm not going to go into any details about that because it's a very well-researched subject, that the whole kind of cult of the Second World War was created first in the Soviet Union and then very actively promoted by Putin and employed and exploited towards his imperialistic goals in the international politics. And there are, of course, all kinds of explanations why this cult is so fundamental for Putin's legitimization and for kind of the imperial and messianic agenda, which drives at the moment the war in Ukraine. And today, as they all heard, yesterday, Russia has started threatening also kind of in a more aggressive way than ever. It's not to say it has never done it before, but definitely what is going on now is kind of out of scale, even given the hate of Putin's regime towards Litva and Estonia. So the kind of whole new series of threats has came up recently to those independent states. So the central kind of figure of this cult is certainly Stalin. Stalin is considered their victor, the triumphant victor in the Second World War, and also a strong leader. And as Pyotr Pomerantsev shown to a great effect, Putin and his ideologists are very postmodern in their approach to history. They, of course, dislike communism and Marxism and everything related to this ideology, including its egalitarian kind of side and hatred for capitalism. So they just, as Pomerantsev shows, they're very kind of, they couldn't care less about the consistency of their historical or ideological message. So they take Stalin the victor and they throw away completely everything related to his to him as a leader of the Communist Party. And interestingly, the same does the Russian Orthodox Church. They also, some of the Orthodox extremists, they want to canonize Stalin even, but basically the church regards Stalin as a good man, despite the fact that he was obviously the Bolshevik leader who turned Russia into a secular society and who basically annihilated those priests who were against the Bolshevik politics. So this kind of new image of Stalin is very central to Putin's politics. And once again, many observers and many researchers who are looking at the origins of Putin's politics, they have definitely spotted out all the resemblances between what's going on in Ukraine and their politics, which Stalin committed and Stalinists committed during Stalin's times. However, there is another very important trend in Putin's memory politics, which explains, to my mind, a lot about what's going on. Back in 2016, I proposed to apply the term neo-medievalism to explain this kind of very important trend in Putin memory politics. And by this neo-medieval memory politics, I mean the whole scope of measures that have been, once again, very consistently taken by the Russian state to the Kremlin since Putin took the office. So basically, starting from mid-2000s, starting from roughly their second term Putin's second term, a lot of new kind of ideas, new and old, it's depends, of course, from the perspective you look at them. Many of them are very old. Like, for example, the idea that Russia is the third Rome and therefore should conquer the rest of the world to bring orthodoxy to people who just do not know, from their point of view, the true God. So if you look at the last 20 years of Putin's memory politics, you see all kind of measures which have been taken to promote the image of the Russian Middle Ages. For example, many of you, especially Kostya, who is from Moscow, couldn't help but notice that over the past 4 years, several monuments were erected to celebrate Ivan the Terrible. Ivan the Terrible, as many of you know, was a medieval ruler, a tyrant, who in the 16th century created the regime of the first kind of state terror in Russian history, called the Oprichnina. And as his nickname, the Terrible, suggests, he has been remembered consistently until the mid-1990s as the most cruel, the most horrible Tsar in Russian history. So in Russian tradition, if you look at the Romanovs period, at Russian imperial history, or even Soviet history, nobody has erected monuments to Stalin, even to Ivan the Terrible. Even Stalin, who admired Ivan the Terrible, as they know from his discussions of the movie Ivan the Terrible, his discussions with Eisenstein, even Stalin never allowed himself to create a monument to Ivan. So since 2006, well, the whole idea dates back to 2005, then the sect of neo-Oprichniks tried to erect a monument to Stalin in one of the provincial Russian regions, but in 2005, time was not yet ripe for this kind of initiatives, and so this project was never realized. In 2012, the first memorial plaque appeared in Arkhangelsk, in the northern Russian city. There, citizens of Arkhangelsk greeted Ivan the Terrible, commemorated Ivan the Terrible as, I'm sorry, I have forgotten my phone, just give me 1 second. So he, my apologies. So Ivan the Terrible was celebrated as the founder of the city of Arkhangelsk by grateful citizens. And 2016, there is the first bronze monument in the city of Oryol, which was opened by the then Minister of Culture, Vladimir Medinsky, and the governor of Oryol. And since then, there has been several projects and more monuments were created, 2 more monuments were created to Stalin, one of them at their city in a small town nearby Moscow, Alexandrova, which was the center of Ivan Zaprishnyna. And because the citizens protested against the monument initially in 2017, it was moved to Moscow, placed on their Alley of the Heroes, and then moved back in 2019 to Alexandrova. There were also projects of creating monuments to Ivan the Terrible in Kazan and in Astrakhan. So as we can see, and also in Ruza. So as we can see from this geography, those monuments commemorate the Oprishchina as well as Ivan the Terrible territorial conquests. Ivan the Terrible is so important for the Russian nationalists because he was, they consider him to be the founder of the Russian Empire because he conquered the Kazan and Astrakhan Khaganates and led the war against the West. They don't care much that the very concept of the West didn't exist back in 16th century. But the fact that Ivan the Terrible fought against Lithuanian and Polish states is very, very important for his supporters and for the Russian extreme right. The monumental propaganda of Ivan the Terrible is not the only aspect of what's going on. Since 2009, there have been several TV serials and movies produced with the support of the Russian state. And I'm not going to list them all, but that has been a very, very impressive initiative. Conferences, scientific conferences, so-called scientific, basically formed around that attract normally some historians of this period of Muscovite truce, but usually attract many Russian nationalists, have been conducted in Alexandrova, in Moscow. But it should be admitted that there were also protests against this campaign of memorization of Ivan the Terrible. For example, in Astrakhan and in Kazan, the projects of creating those memorials completely failed, despite quite considerable pressure from Moscow and from the Russian nationalists. There are suggestions that very often there are attempts to create those monuments to Grozny kind of compensate for impossibility to openly open up their monuments to Stalin. And of course, and it has been observed many, many times that Stalin and Ivan the Terrible, they are kind of memorial twins. They are interchangeable in many respects. And the reason why they are so often kind of spoken of together and why they are so often evoked jointly in the discourse of the Russian far right, it's precisely because they both incarnate the two main instances of terror in Russian history, that of the medieval terror, state terror, the Oprishchina, and Stalinism. Alongside this monumental and cinematographic propaganda, there are, of course, many books published about Ivan the Terrible. Sometimes the state supports, sometimes not. I also shouldn't forget to mention that one important dimension of this propaganda is post-Soviet historiography, which plays a very, very important role in promoting the cult of Ivan the Terrible. But as I said, there has been quite a bit of resistance. So Kazan and Astrakhan are two examples. There has been also a resistance from among Russian intellectuals and Russian creators against this memory politics. The movie Tsar by Lungin, filmed in 2009, that shows the horrors of Oprichnina and demonstrates that Ivan the Terrible was indeed the murderer who murdered his own son and also murdered on his orders Metropolitan Philip, canonized in 17th century as a saint, was also murdered. Both facts have been contested starting from 1990s by Russian Orthodox sects and also by some right-wing ideologists. Lungin film was a kind of cinematographic attempt to show the horrors of Oprichnina, and definitely it kind of joins their initiative, the project by a wonderful Russian writer, Vladimir Sorokin, who in his two books, their Day of the Oprichniki and Sugar Kremlin, described the horrors of Oprichnina in contemporary Russia. So now this politics, okay, I am finalizing my kind of presentation. So because there was a resistance to their memorials, kind of promoting the cult of Ivan the Terrible, starting from 2021, this memory politics shifted to Alexander Nevsky, another medieval prince, who is much less controversial politically, but still a medieval prince. So the question arises why those medieval princes are so needed by Kremlin and how it's related to the Ukrainian, to the war and what's going on now in Ukraine. And my answer to this question is simple. The Russian Middle Ages are promoted by Putin's, the Kremlin ideologists and their proxies, because the Russian Middle Ages are presented as an alternative to democracy, as an alternative to the democratic society, because the social project, the Russian far right, the Russian neo-medieval far right trying to promote is precisely a project that advocates for the return to the autocratic monarchy, society of estates, and slavery as kind of necessary components of Russian social structure in the future. And those projects are very closely related to their imperial politics, which Putin is conducting now. Terror is the very core of how Russian society should be governed. From the Russian far right point of view, terror is the only way Russia should be governed. And that's why they're so keen to promote Stalin and Ivan, Oprichnina and Stalinism as their main kind of wonderful examples from the Russian future. Hence, what's happening now in Ukraine is not an accident. It's, to my mind, a consequence of this anti-democratic and inhumane memory politics, which has been brainwashing the Russian population for many years. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dina, for your very interesting presentation. Are you listening? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, okay. Now we shall move on to the next presentation by our friend Konstantin Miftakhudinov, who is in Moscow right now. So, Kostya, please take it away.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, thank you for a kind invitation to participate. And I'm also very sorry that we have to speak it during an awful war that Putin started against Ukraine. And yeah, I must also say many thanks to Dina Hapaeva and her presentation, which lead us to a very interesting part of Russian medievalism. But now I will speak not about these terrible things as Ivan the Terrible and Stalin's terror, but a little bit. I'm sorry, my cat very like to come to me when I speak in Zoom. Yeah, so yeah, today I will talk a little bit about my project, the Suffering Middle Ages, which is, I think, another point of working with medieval past in Russia. And I will make a short presentation of it and say some words what I think why it's important. And to begin with, the Suffering Middle Ages, it's internet public page. It's online project, and nowadays we have nearly 1 million subscribers in many social networks like ВКонтакте. It's Russian analog of Facebook. In Facebook itself, in Telegram channel, Instagram, and we are trying to create a popular English Instagram account. And I have to admit that we are probably the most popular public page about history in Russia. And I use the word "we" about the Suffering Middle Ages because I'm doing it together with my friend and classmate Yuri Saprikin, and we mostly do medieval memes. So we use all kinds of medieval imagery sources, like manuscripts or sculptures from medieval cathedrals and so on. We use everything that is a source for a good research in the field of art history. And hopefully, as there are a tremendous number of strange. Excuse me. Yeah, yeah, strange. There are a lot of strange medieval images like hideous cats, bloodthirsty and ferocious rabbits, and of course unsolicited dick pics and other strange things. We show all of them to our audience, and sometimes we make a dialogue between people and animals or people or whatever on this image. It looks funny sometimes. They laugh at the picture itself, or it's laugh at some everyday stuff, or it's laugh at the current political agenda in Russia. And our audience likes this kind of humor. The Suffering Middle Ages was created nearly 9 years ago with history department students in the High School of Economics. It's a research university in Russia, and we had a Middle Ages history course. In the Russian educational system, it's a mandatory course for history students, and it was one of the hardest subjects with lots of reading and work, and commonly we had to study a lot during the night. One day, one of my colleagues sent in our chat a part of the image of the crucifixion by a proto-Renaissance Italian artist Giotto di Ponte. There was an angel who mourned Jesus Christ died on a cross, and she said this angel looks just like us mourning our good 8-hour sleep. Then somebody joked that it was the suffering Middle Ages, so the main idea was that everybody suffered then and everybody suffered now, and let's joke about it. Let's joke about our suffers, and yeah, and that's how the suffering Middle Ages appeared, and I must explain that since 2012, in High School of Economics, there is a Center for Medieval Studies. It's a huge international center, and they have a lot of scientific events about Middle Ages. For example, there are research seminars like symbolic, their names are like symbolic Middle Ages, debatable Middle Ages. They also have a summer school for young medievalists, dynamic Middle Ages, and so you can see something with Middle Ages was quite popular formula, and the name the suffering Middle Ages looks like a part of this paradigm. It was quite common for us and for other students, other people, and it wasn't boring scientific stuff like these research seminars, but it was students' attempt to laugh in situation with lots of homework and lack of sleep. I guess it was our reaction to the stress of our studying and at that time, the suffering Middle Ages was an example of the culture of popular laughter, as it was described by a famous Russian philosopher and literary critic Mikhail Bakhtin. And in the suffering Middle Ages, we inverted the norms and mocked the official scientific events like these research seminars. We used their name, and it looked like a very respectful scientific event, but we showed some medieval images of dicks or rabbits, violence, or other non-appropriate things and laughed at it. It was our kind of medieval carnival as it was studied and described by Bakhtin. During the first 2 or 3 years, Suffering Middle Ages was just a student page in social media with a couple hundred subscribers from Russian universities. It was full of jokes about student life, but there also were main jokes about current affairs or just everyday life, like comparing an image of Saint Ambrose of Milan, created by Simone Martini, and sleeping during a mass with a common man sleeping in an underground train. Or a talk between two angels from the illustration of the Book of Revelation who talk about the NIMBY as if they were donuts. And this meme had become more and more popular, and the picture with angels was stolen and published by another very popular public page in Vkontakte. It was a normal situation, and it gave us popularity and recognition. And later on, one of the independent journalists from Russian independent media, Medusa, wrote about us, and it provided us with the first couple thousand subscribers. And the first mention on a big media, it was barely unknown today, Admi Journal, a huge, but in that time it was a huge media with 1 million visitors per day, and they published a number of our memes with a link on our page, and it was a huge success. But it also showed us what future troubles with the suffering Middle Ages will look like. And I also need one short excursion in modern Russian history. In 2013, blasphemy law was introduced in Russia. It was done when feminist protest and performance art group Pussy Riot sang a protest song in the cathedral of Church the Savior in Moscow. It's the main Russian Orthodox church cathedral. And the song name was Punk Prayer, Mother of God, Drive Putin Away. At the time, there was no blasphemy law among Russian laws, but it was shortly after then introduced, and in case of more protest performances in churches, to seize them and to protect also the church from any critic. And then in nearly 2014, ADME published our memes. A lot of them was with clergymen and monks and priests, as you know. These people, the clergy was they were the main aim of medieval marginalia and medieval criticism. And one guy wrote a comment that he will ask Russian police to investigate if there are any blasphemy on this page, and admin deleted everything. But we also get subscribers and mentions of the victim of a new unjust law. And so it was mentioning that that during all the years of the suffering Middle Ages existence, there were a number of Orthodox radicals who wanted to ban us or some of our memes, but they never succeeded, and we were never prosecuted for our jokes, and I hope it will be so in future. I really do hope it. And working on the suffering Middle Ages, we have seen and collected a great number of medieval images, and we started to think of making some kind of a book or an album or something like that. But it was just an idea, but hopefully we met an editor from the Aster publish houses. It's one of two Russian publishing monopolies, so it's a very huge publishing house. And this publishing house can risk lots of money and publish an unpopular book about medieval art, and so they did it. This book was a huge risk. It was no risk for us, but it was a risk for market, for the publishing house. And we wanted it to be a great book, so we find three outstanding art historians, Mikhail Maizul, Sergei Zotov, and Richard Harman. And together they wrote a wonderful book about strange medieval images on marginalia, problems with NIMBY and nude people on churches' walls, and other rather strange images. And the book was a great success. It won the Enlightened Prize for Russian language nonfiction literature. It's a very important and very famous book prize in Russia. And nowadays, more than 60,000 copies have been sold. So it's also a lot if you edit a history book in Russian. And nowadays we have a full book series where we publish classical Western research translated into Russian. We published medieval sources or modern Russian scholars and their books about history, medieval art, and so on. It's led by a small council consisting of my friend and colleague Yuri Saprikin and two other teachers from the High School of Economics, Oleg Voskobonnikov as a specialist in the Western Middle Ages, and Andrei Vinogradov as the Byzantine Empire expert. And I hope it's a good example of how academia can co-live and co-work with popular media for common benefit. Because these books, I hope that they can do good for Russia, and they can help us to better understand the world, everything, and yeah, and so I also have to say that Oleg, as mentioned, Oleg Voskobonnikov is also our partner in highly popular podcast. It called also the Suffering Middle Ages. There we talk with medievalists about life in the Middle Ages. So we discuss architecture, funerals, elections, sex, alcohol production, and many other important things. And we made this podcast only for 1 year. And last year, Yandex, it's the most important Russian IT company. And they also have their own musical and podcast platform. And Russian Apple Podcasts and Forbes Russia named our podcast as the best new podcast of the year. And we have nearly 30,000 listeners for now. In 2020, also Forbes Russia nominated us for the 30 Under 30 awards and the most perspective Russians in the sphere of media. After the beginning of the war, it's quite crazy to be the most perspective Russians, but it was. And in these nominees, there were mostly real journalists and comedians, and we were the only people somehow related to science, to history, and since the very beginning of the Suffering Middle Ages, we have talked about history and tried to make history and humanities more popular among Russians. As the very first article, it even was a suggestion that it was a propaganda campaign by the Center for Medieval Studies in the High School of Economics. But it wasn't so, and we tried to, but we very like to introduce some scientific events to promote some scientists and to speak about many scientific organizations and events in Russia. We also try to make our own scientific project, like our project High Middle Ages. This title was a temporary decision, but later it wasn't replaced and was used for some time. And here we try to explain what's going on in the strange medieval pictures, which were a basis for our memes. And it was a wonderful source to speak with normal people who are non-historians about the Middle Ages. For example, a very popular guy with huge genitals from the 13th century manuscript was a wonderful example to show the transfer of medical knowledge from the Arab East to the Christian Europe. And we also presented a project about medievalism in the Game of Thrones universe. But unfortunately, in Russia, we could not be just a project about art and science. As I said early from the beginning, we had some minor problems because of the political situation in Russia, because of the unjust laws that unfortunately are in Russia now. And we could not ignore the political agenda, the changes in the political situation in our country, and we just can't ignore it. And we joke a lot about new unfair laws, the Russian authoritarian regime, but we try to do it in the most, I think, medieval way, using allegories and metaphors to make political content more appropriate to our subscribers. We also give space to talk for Russian opposition politicians, and sometimes help them to recruit new volunteers for the election campaign. Unfortunately, elections in Russia, it's hard thing, and not many of them won this election, but there are two municipal deputies. There are much more oppositional municipal deputies in Russia, but there are two guys with whom we helped them with their fundraising, and nowadays they were elected and they work as municipal deputies, and they both are Middle Ages historians, and I think that supporting people in the political struggle is a rather important thing. And when Russia attacked Ukraine this February, we actually were shocked, and as many Russians. And for the first couple of days, nothing was posted in the suffering Middle Ages, and then the new law of military censorship was introduced. A lot of laws, I think, and here our experience of political metaphors was very useful to express to express our anti-war opinion without getting severe punishment. And I also hope that we will continue to express this anti-war position in our pages. And the Middle Ages, it's a huge epoch with a huge art heritage, as this heritage can be used in many ways, even to express some anti-war position. And of course, it can be used to make some people laugh and make people a bit happy. And I hope we can do it in our public public page. Thank you.
Kostya, thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to ask you if we could show the page, the Instagram page on the screen. Can I show it? I think Luis must allow me to share my screen. Thank you. So here it is. It's medieval suffering, right? And страдающие средневековье. Unfortunately, I think it's only for those who speak Russian, right? But anyone will find it interesting anyway. Okay, so thank you again for your presentation. Let's move on to our very own Leandro Cesar. And I will give you the floor now, Leandro.
Okay, thank you, Lucas. I'm going to try to share my screen, but I don't know how technology happens. So I expect you all to see it. Can you see it, the slide?
Not yet. It has, yeah, now I can.
Just on my test. Can you see this? Did the slide pass?
Yep,
Or is it still on the first page?
it's working. It passed.
Okay. So, first of all, I must thank Jane, Grupo de Estudo de História Medieval, Grupo de Estudo de História Medieval from the State University of Montes Claros for the invitation. I thank all the panelists here, Dina and Kostya, excellent presentations, and now I hope that I can maintain the high quality of the debate. And I also hope that I won't piss off a lot of people, because I was invited to James to talk about some medievalism and medievalist manifestations in the war. I am not a specialist in medievalism. I actually studied the pre-Mongol period, most specifically pre-Mongol church. However, it is one of those rare cases that academia, especially Brazilian, recognizes that what you're doing is finally important. It is happy and sad at the same time, because this comes at the cost of a lot of people losing their lives. So I'm going to start by reading a text, if you allow me. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, or Special Operation Z, as it's known and forced to known in Russia, in the start of this year surprised some people, yet was a given to others. It's still going on, despite claims of a blitzkrieg-like attempt of conquest, with some counter that's saying that it was a slow operation of all time. The world became divided on who to root, on how to root, on how to not root, and for if there is any good, if there are any good or bad guys involved in all of this. From NATO to the Pope Francis, to the Asian governments, to the wildest varieties of political commentators from all sides of political compass, one thing that is constant is how weirdly current the Middle Ages are being used and abused in this conflict, especially by Russia. Who from us has never read about or written about Vladimir Putin's now famous "Ukraine never existed," quote unquote, discourse, blatantly appealing to pre-Mongol past to justify a supposed unity of all Russian people. Yet, from the assorted side and its sympathizers, not a lot has been talked about. It seems that Russia owns a monopoly over the medieval and the conflict at first glance. This presentation is the result of an invitation from GEM, Medieval History Study Group of State University of Montes Claros, which happens to be one of my research groups other than Latin, as I show here, the second one, to offer a Brazilian and a medievalist look at some of uses of Middle Ages that appeared during the conflict in the most diverse ways, from charity to memes to political propaganda. My main goal, therefore, is to offer the audience a preliminary and exploratory look on some manifestations of medievalism in the war between Russia and Ukraine, particularly those affiliated or sympathetic with the latter. Due to the nature of what I'm going to talk about and show, however, a disclaimer is necessary. What I'm doing is not defending Russia's alleged right to attack Ukraine, nor NATO's desire to create a Yugoslavia 2.0. I am not a political scientist. This is not an apology to either side, nor am being paid by either Russia or Ukraine or NATO or the Cradle.co or anyone, whoever. In fact, I'm unemployed. As an inhabitant of the global south, I also acknowledge my incapacity of comprehending the pain of everyone directly involved in the conflict, who lost relatives or friends, or who do not know if they lost relatives or friends. To them, all I can offer is my deepest condolences and hope that this will end soon. I just want to present a pragmatic approach and analysis of some of medieval imagery operated in support and defense of Ukraine. For that reason, I chose not to talk about the tritsup, a heraldic element that has been reappropriated since the early 20th century by Mikhail Khrushchevsky, and that now is a symbol for Ukraine resistance as well as to some far-right movements. This should be a presentation for another time. It's a hypothesis that the Middle Ages serves as a shield for Ukraine, and we shall start by its most sacred interpretation. During the start of invasion, the Ukrainian people, apparently with a few ways to defend themselves against the onslaught, received a heavenly aid with a mere FGM 148 Javelin anti-tank missile launcher from the United States. This created a resistant icon called Saint Javelin, based mostly on Mary Magdalene, holding said weapon. Saint Javelin was later adopted by the Ukrainian Canadian Polish journalist Christian Boris and transformed into a charity of the same name, receiving over $1 million that, according to the founder, was and is still being used to reconstruct Ukraine and help its army against the invasion. Saint Javelin soon found other saints to have composed what I'm calling its war synaxarion. Most of them are hydrologized forms of other weapons used for the defense of the Ukrainians, all transformed in icon-like images that decorate, or in the case of the saints, consecrate cloths, mugs, and other objects. The saints come from all European Christendom. Saint Susanna, the Slovak protector, tank, Saint Piorun, a Polish interceptor of missiles, the German Saint Panzerfaust, ready to stop all tanks, and the list goes on. The cosmopolitan European factor will be addressed later, but it's worth noting that all of these holy weapons are held mostly by the Theotokos herself, indicating a heavenly action to shield the Ukrainians from attacks of mostly perceived to be diabolical forces. So I forgot to put the site here, it will be in the next slide, but if anyone wants to donate, wants to buy some merch, it's sendjavelin.com. I think it will be in the next. I think the charity is legit. I don't know, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt, but yeah, you can access if you want, I can send a link. The guy seems, although he has some questionable posts, he seems genuine. One other notable saint that composes the war synaxarion is Olga, regent of Rus from 1945 to 1964, while her son Sviatoslav Igorevich was still a minor. Immortalized in the Povest Vremennych Liet, known in English as Tale of Bygone Years and translated to Portuguese by our own Lucas Simone, for defending her realm against the insidious advances of the Dervilians and their Prince Mal that mercilessly killed her husband Ihor, Olga, quoting her blood in the charity site, the honorary saint of Kiev and warrior queen. She ruled the nation, defied odds, and protects Ukraine to this day. Hopefully the queen's interactions with the Germans won't inspire any parallel with the current situations, since she was, sorry, I'm a bit sick. Since Olga was asked to send missionaries from Germany, and then the Germans sent, but the offer was refused by Sviatoslav, and there was a whole turmoil, which we can enter later if you ask. Hope that it won't inspire any parallel of the situation, but nevertheless, we see a clear association with medievalism and religion. According to Maria Eugenia Bertarelli and Clínio de Oliveira Amaral, drawing from some conclusions by Richard Utz, a dialogue between the two fields is more than necessary since a relationship was often denied given the supposed different perceptions of both medievalism and religions regarding the experience of time. In this way, quoting Bertarelli and Amaral, the temporalization of history, including other human sciences in general, could be incompatible with the particular way which religion relates with time, that is, with the multitemporalities. However, we sustain that although there are different forms of temporalization in Christianism, one must not forget that religion is itself an object of human sciences and not an ontological revelation as it is for theology. Therefore, religion has a diachronical relationship with time, and here resides an answer to this problem. The synchronous relationship with time, alluded by the authors, is not intrinsic to religion, but rather a social construction, to a large extent medieval, and it is able to engender multiple temporalities through the number of performative rituals and liturgies, as the case of Mass or in the way that the Bible is read. This means that the recourse to elements of Christianity and to the intercessors between the divinity and the profane world, link Christian and current temporalities together. I would go far to say that it links different branches of Christianity. In the screen, I show the image of Saint Patron, also sold by the site of St. Javelin. You can see that, at least I perceived it, for some people that I presented, they also did not know, there's a lot of Saint Guinefort in this image. For those who do not know, Saint Guinefort was a saintly dog of France who was revered after alleged killing a snake and being martyrized by its owners. But then he had a lot of vox populi miracles and became somewhat of a persecuted saint, unofficial, until the cult somewhat ended in the 12th century. Guinefort is the dog saint. He is a medieval concept. Even on the board the Mother of God, the saintly weapons became analogous to martyrs, worn out by persecution but perished to defend the oppressed, while all had transformed the present-day Ukraine, attacked by Russia, into that of 10th century, potentially devastated by foreigners. As we stated before, this is supposed to be an exploratory analysis of possibilities, and the war Synaxarion can be an important source to study medievalism in and for Ukraine. The Ukrainians are not only being protected by the saints, not the only ones being protected by the saints. The admin of St. Javelin exemplifies this logic with a shared true medieval meme, with a confident caption, quote unquote, for a free Ukraine and a democratic Europe, taken by a picture of Lord of the Rings. Truly, allies and sympathizers of the invaded nation believe that what is at stake is the whole old continent. This matches a somewhat recent trend of historiography, led in the West mainly by Christian Raffensperger, arguing that Kievan Rus was an important part of European Middle Ages, and it's impossible to think about a medieval Europe without taking in consideration Rus. I firmly believe in Raffensperger's assertion, and to a lesser extent, the Ukrainian allies seem to do too. By a certain extent, I mean that they indeed perceive Ukraine as Europe, and thus the attack gets a metonymic significance. The problem, however, is how this Europe is perceived. I don't know if the authors hailing from the global north are unaware or choose to be unaware given the delicate subject matter. But could this Middle Ages that finally accepted Ukraine as a part of itself after a long time be the same Middle Ages that most of the colonial medievalists are trying to demystify? Is a Russian attack on the vague but incredibly dangerous old colonialist concept of Western civilization with the Middle Ages as its roots? We don't know for sure, but when Ukraine chief prosecutor David, I'm going to mispronounce because I don't know, Sakvarilidze, sorry if I mispronounced the name, cried that, open quote, European people with blue eyes and blonde hairs, end quote, amidst accusations of the borders refusing to let Asians and people with Asian and African descent and trans women to leave the country, could it be related to a specific medieval white Christian heteronormative Europe that is being attacked? When the CBS American reporter Charlie D'Agata stated the astonishing sentence, open quote, but this isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades because to hell with Yugoslavia, I guess. You know, this is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have chosen those words carefully too, city where you would not expect hope that it's going to happen. Would it not be a defense of the same pristine white European civilization that once applauded some medievalists such as Jacques Lagoff, but is now reconsidered by serious scholars? Unfortunately, it all points to the old, classic, exclusive European Middle Ages. And of course, if Europe is the one being attacked, the enemy is someone that's not from the continent. In the medieval framework, well, could Russia be a barbarian? Could the Russians all be savages? An uncivilized invader? It seemed that the old Orientalism against Eastern Europe that was described by Larry Wolff in his priceless Inventing Eastern Europe took a new form during the conflict. Again, I must reiterate that I'm not excusing Russia of anything. Nor I want to enter the matter or not of Russophobia, let alone I'm trying to domesticate any anger toward the perceived assaulter. But let's take a look at two political cartoons by Ukrainian cartoonist Serhiy Kolyada, published by the site Kievan Post. The first is titled, open quote, Kiev's Volodymyr the Great confronting Vladimir Ruski Mir, commander of the Orcs. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is a clear allusion to Volodymyr Sviatoslavich, the knyaz that allegedly brought Christianity to Rus in the end of the 10th century, while Putin is clearly someone that's not from Europe. He's a yellow, squint-eyed, Fu Manchu mustached Mongol, an Asian, a non-European, drawn in a fashion that only lacks a bucket tooth to be confused with a World War II allied depiction of a Japanese. His second cartoon, entitled Putin Han and the New Mongol Invasion of Europe, confirms this, with the president marching alongside his Oriental horde. It's as if Samuel's Huntington extremely racist theory of the class of civilizations never left at all. The Asian Russian is barbaric, ruled by an autocrat, as Europe is still traumatized from the rape of Lucretia and the Tarquinius, that vows to destroy the vague concept of the European democracy as a whole. Their backwardness and savageness can also be explained by their slow evolution, as shown by a tweet from the US Embassy of Kiev in the wake of the invasion that states that while Ukrainian capital was filled with golden churches, the apex of European Christian civilization and intellectual finesse, Moscow was at the same time a forest all along, the same forest. A similar idea, coupled with heavy Orientalism, is expressed by the astonishingly bad interview from the so-called intellectual Yuval Harari to Brazilian's biggest TV station. Quoting him directly, Kiev was already a major metropolis and a capital and a cultural center, when Moscow was not even a village, when Moscow was just, a forest. Then the Mongols came. The Mongols rose to power as tax collectors of the Mongols. When the Mongols invaded, they needed somebody local to be the henchman, to go around and collect money from the local communities and towns, and Moscow volunteered to do that. This is how it started to rise to power. Disregarding both the fact that Velik Novgorod apparently never existed and the audacity or chutzpah of saying that being a forest during the Middle Ages to a Brazilian audience is a bad thing, again, to a Brazilian audience, the examples above show that a medieval Europe is being built to shield Ukraine against the invasion. However, this sometimes comes to the expense of reinforcing old colonial views of Europe and its people, its frontiers, and its supposed superiority among others, being destroyed by external forces that threaten the very ontology of a civilization. Relying on a white, Christian civilized Europe, a simulacra of the European Middle Ages, is especially perilous rhetoric, which, if not scrutinized by those who support Ukraine against the attacks, may justify and fall into the trap of a very particular ideology. To quote Luis Felipe Anchieta Guerra, open quote, neo-medievalism, however, would be one step further, being a virtual image of said real image, which exists only the inside of mirror, and which has already incorporated enough elements, such as flowers in the Lacan's drawing, and distortions to make sense of its own. It's a new image, an image of the image, the reflection of the reflection, a medievalism of medievalisms, which no longer needs to be linked to an original historical period to exist. A white Christian colonial Europe has no place for inferior foreigners is one of the pillars of the so-called Azov Battalion, a fascist military group which, according to journalist Pepe Escobar, pro-Russia, is the main target of Russia and one of the reasons for the invasion, the so-called denazification argument. I'd argue that we need to break down this idea of Europe if we really want to break down the line argument of, oh, Ukraine needs to be denazified for the reasons that I'm going to show, and also trigger warning, the second image may have some heavy wording and may cause some problems. The following images have been taken directly from what seems to be the official Azov Telegram channel, which now has been, ironically enough, conquered by the Russians, has not been active since, except for some internal struggles between pro-Russians and pro-Ukrainians. Here you can see two dangerous examples of neo-medieval Middle Ages justifying fascist politics. The first image is a play on the Iberian Reconquista, with the N of the word chanted for the Nazist symbol Wolfsangel, one of the main symbols of the militia, alluding to the movement that supposedly expelled the Moors of political decisions and took control of Spain. If we see an Azov soldier, which appear to be images of neo-Vikings, alluding not only to the Normanist theory of the foundation of Rus solely by Vikings and Norsemen, but also to a supposed Germanic master race that the Azov cultivate. The caption reads, "Сегодня Украина, завтра Rus и вся Европа." Today Ukraine, tomorrow Rus and all of Europe, which implies that Azov has plans to eradicate all undesirable elements of the continent, which may only conclude that they mean the non-white, non-Christian inhabitants. The second image is more blatant and more offensive. The classic image of St. George slaying a dragon is swapped by a Zonenrad, halo-bearing skeleton with the Azov shield, killing a red dragon containing both a hammer and sickle and the Star of David, representing anti-communism and anti-Semitism in its finest. The caption is somewhat haunting, not only containing a slur against Russians, but also referring to non-Europeans as quote-unquote third world subhumans. Accepting the neo-medieval European Middle Ages that some allies are shoving into Ukraine means legitimizing this kind of discourse and indirectly supporting Putin's denazification. Again, when trying to support Ukraine, when trying to analyze the neo-medieval aspects of the war, we must scrutinize everything, even if an ally or if you hate the other. I'd like to conclude this presentation with the other face of the coin. As stated in the beginning, the use of Middle Ages in the war is not exclusive to Ukraine. Russia and Russian allies like the imagery as much, using the medieval and non-medieval aesthetic and rhetoric in similar fashions, although with the strong distaste for the vague idea of West and all of that it supposedly represents. According to Dina Khapayeva's wonderful article, Putin is just following the manual. As you can see, the first image, this one, I don't know if you can see my cursor. This is an image of the Wagner Battalion, which is Russian Azov. You can also see this one on the other side, which is Russia with all its icons and Christianity fighting against what it considers to be West, the LGBTQIA+ flag, the European Union, the NATO, and Ukraine. This is a cute political cartoon that I found of here the fight, you can see a flag. I don't know if it's from Donetsk or Luhansk, but it's against a dragon holding the trisup. And here's a column of Pepe Escobar, again, a political commentator talking about almost like of Byzance après Byzance, the concept of Nikolai Yorga. I particularly like Putin with the famous Game of Thrones line, taunting Europe for its dependence on Russian gas and the disaster that is to come, and the Byzance après Byzance idea from Nikolai Yorga angle that some commentators are applying to their analysis. Unfortunately, all points to the multiplication of sources since the conflict is unlikely to stop sooner. But I hope to show how effective the Middle Ages are used as a shield and as a weapon, and how dangerous it may become if it carries abused. We need to distinguish the good use of Middle Ages from a bad one, or else it may fail in the Azov territory. Thanks for your attention. Again, I hope that I did not play the devil's advocate so much, and I'll eagerly await for all your questions. I hope that I kept the same quality that both Dina and Kostya showed, and thank you.
Thanks, Leandro. You surely did. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much for that. Now we shall move on to the questions. I think you must have questions to one another. I have a couple of questions myself. first of all, one question to all the guests. I think it's kind of, there's no way we couldn't make that question concerning periodization, because of course, Kostya was talking of a more European, so to speak, Middle Ages or European medievalism, right? But both Dina and Leandro talked about a more Russian or Ukrainian or Eastern European medievalism. So how could we discuss medievalism in the background of a different kind of periodization like the one we have in Russia and Ukrainian history? Now, a couple of questions to each one of you. You can comment later. Dina, actually, the question I was going to make, she kind of answered during the presentation, because I was going to ask about Sorokin's book, The Day of the Oprichnik. But even so, I was wondering about this kind of mobilization of the past that takes place in Russia since the 19th century, usually by and Ukraine, of course, usually by the right wing. But then we have also this kind of counter mobilization of the past by the left wing, like the one, or let's call it the left wing, like Sorokin or Lumigin, or even Eisenstein himself. So could you please comment more on this, let's call it left-wing counter-medievalism? And also, I remember the poem by Lermontov, Novgorod, which kind of recalls a sort of, let's call it an alternative medievalism for Russia, with a proto-democratic society and all of that, with the Viechi and the assembly and the bell and all of that imagery that has been built around the Novgorod Republic. I think Kostya already talked about that extensively, but when I heard your presentation, you were talking about the way that that page, the meme page and the meme aesthetics can be a weapon against authoritarianism and this repression. And I couldn't help remembering the concept of Aesopian language that is present in 20th century and 19th century Russian literature. Do you think you could consider the page and that complex of pages that you have built kind of an heir to the tradition of Russian Aesopian language? And to Leandro, I was thinking about the role of Moscow. You know, when we talk from the global South, as you said, or from the so-called West, we usually use the word Russia, right? Or sometimes Great Russia. But it feels to me that Ukrainians themselves tend to use the word Moscow. So it's not that much the idea that Russia is a real thing, as much as a reinterpretation of the history of Eastern Europe, or Rus, as a tale of the gathering of lands by Moscow. So as Dina also mentioned, the Third Rome ideology, could you discuss further the relationship between Kyiv on the one side and Moscow on the other side, and how this ideology kind of dances around this clash between these two cities? Those were my questions, and I don't know if you want to comment first and then ask each other questions. We have a lot of questions from the audience as well, so please. Dina, do you want to start?
Well, I will try to be very quick because I also have questions to our wonderful panelists. Thank you very much for your questions, Lucas. It's really interesting what then you characterize Sorokin and Lungin, and especially Eisenstein, as left-wing. I mean, Eisenstein probably is the only one who deserves this characterization, because he was an ardent Stalinist, a communist, everything. But Sorokin and Lungin are definitely, in Russian terms, are liberal. They're liberal Democrats. They are people who fighting against Putinism, not from the communist perspective, not from the leftist perspective, but from the perspective of protection of liberal values in Russia. Neo-medievalism, I think it's a very apt question when you speak about European medievalism. I am using the word neo-medievalism in a very specific sense. I talk about the specific memory politics that instrumentalizes the image of the Middle Ages. There's a particular purpose to create a project for society, for Russian society, and not only for Russian. Trump uses it in the same way, in his politics. And I know from, colleagues from Brazil, for example, that, Lewis wrote about that it's also used here as weaponizing anti-democratic politics. So to my mind, neo-medievalism is a political project, and everything which has to do with aesthetics, I completely take out of my definition of this concept. And my probably very last comment, because I want to ask my questions to as well, is just that I have forgotten, when I was talking, I have forgotten to mention state legislative initiatives which promote neo-medievalism. Constitution, our, new October, 4th November celebration, which is famous, victor of the Poland, and so on and so forth. And there has been not only legislative initiatives, but also instances of applying various laws, and especially in one particular instance, they try to apply the law prohibiting their expressions about fascism to one of their kind of cases of medievalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. You're absolutely right. Both Sorokin and Lungin are liberals. I think I was influenced by the right-wing rhetorics that state that everyone who's not a co-religionary is a left-wing person, right? And now on to Costa, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, can I have a very small comment about Sorokin and Lungin and the lefts? As you say, I think that in modern Russia, we can't say that someone is left and someone is, because we have this great communist party who also very like Russian saints. They are good friends with Russian Orthodox Church, but if Lenin knew that the Communist Party will be friends with the Orthodox Church, I think that it will make him mad. And yeah, it's a hard thing to say that someone is someone in Russia and Russian lefts. I think that they don't use medievalism. I just think about it. I don't remember anything about Middle Ages, but many times these left people, they say that look, the Soviet Union, it was a great nation, great society, and let's come back. So their historical politics, it's not about Middle Ages, it's about the past century. Yeah, sorry for for answering not my question, because for what about Ethiopian language? Yes, of course. In Russian, unfortunately, we have a long tradition of using not the words we want to say, and we use metaphors, we use everything. Nowadays, the word war is banned. We can't say that Russia started the war in Ukraine. We need to say that Russia started a special military operation, and we have a lot of bans. And yes, we have to use Ethiopian language in Russian, and it's a very traditional thing, unfortunately. Yeah, and yeah.
Thanks, Kostya. Now on to Leandro, please.
Okay, thanks, Lucas, for the questions. I think you asked the general question about periodization, how we see medieval Russia, medieval Ukraine, something like that. Wasn't it the first one, the general? Okay, there's an article.
The one about periodization.
Yes. There is one article, I think it's from Charles Halperin. I don't know if it's a true article, it's a review or a review of a review. I think it's the latter one. And I agree when he says that medieval Russia did not exist in medieval Ukraine because Russia and Ukraine did not exist back then. They were modern concepts. They're really modern concepts. And it's not the idea of like, if we say, oh, medieval Brazil, so Brazil had a Middle Ages that ties us to this colonial world. I think that Russia would be different because I really don't believe that a modern Russia nor a modern Ukraine, as we comprehend today, existed during those times. They are modern inventions. That being said, I still like to use the term medieval Rus because for me, Rus was integrated into the European or Eurasian for Christendom. It was European into the commerce, into the marital ties. And again, I agree with Professor Spagman. He said it's impossible to think about Middle Ages as a whole, even though he refers mostly only to medieval Europe. We're not talking about Rus. The thing gets more complicated and that kind of goes to the second question. It's a link. What exactly was the medieval Rus? If it was only Kiev or if it was the later Moscow, it's also a question that maybe I want to ask to both Diana and Kostya. I see you talk about the metonym that Ukrainians mostly call Russia as Moscow, as the horrible, horrible meme by the Azov calls the Moscows, the word that I'm not talking about, out of respect for our Russian colleagues. And I indeed agree that there is this metonymic way, but the way that I think both Harari and the ambassador of the United States talked about is really as a city. Because again, they're forgetting that Novgorod existed. They're forgetting that Ryazan was a bit later, but existed there. Forgetting about Smolensk, about Ladoga, about our space. And I think that this is somewhat, it is interesting because it's a counterpoint of the historiography that prevailed into the West until recently. The great Russian people, especially popularized by Vasily Klechevsky, that Russia started from Kiev, then Bogolyubsky happened, someone that I still have not seen any medieval meme about attacking Kiev, which is honestly really surprising. There's a lot of potential about that. Not saying that that should exist, but come on, we can link 1169 with what is happening now, especially because Andrei did not act on his hand, but sent his henchmen or whatever. But I'm digressing. There's this theory that first it was Kiev, then came the turmoil, then Bogolyubsky attacked, then it kind of everything shifted to north. Bogolyubsky took everything from the churches. He built the Bogolyubovo church with the things that he took from St. Sophia and other Kievan cathedrals. And then all of a sudden, this center, this cultural political center went to the northeast. With the Mongol invasion things exacerbated purely. People tend to take at least ancient today, the narratives of the destruction are relativized, not saying that there were not destruction. That's not saying that the Mongols really did not act by the sword, but it's much less than what, for example, Giovanni Piano da Carpini wrote to the Pope of what Kiev became. And with this destruction of Kiev, the power passed immediately to the north. There was Alexander Nevsky, as Diana pointed out, and then, at least from what I see, the move of Metropolitan Maxim from Kiev to the north, it, according to the historiography, transferred. So these people see Kiev as a cocoon of a Muscovite butterfly. Sorry if this was too poetic, but this is how I think the historiography feels. But then you have, for example, the Khrushchevsky view, which is not him, but he was the one that popularized it, that say, oh no, Ukraine, medieval Rus was, as in the title, history of Ukraine Rus, it was only the West, it was only Ukraine. Russia, Moscow, Vladimir Suzdal was that other thing that never had the relationship with us and only conquered us in later medieval, most modern period. I admit that this is a very touchy subject, although I think it's much more touching than it needs to be. But again, I'm from Global South, I'm not from Ukraine, I'm not from Russia. I cannot even begin to comprehend what the nationalism of those people are. I must stress that every time, please. I'm not, I don't think that I do not understand. But yeah, I think that this relationship academically, I think that's why a part of Russian medievalists that deal with the Drevny Russian period are talking more about the pre-Mongol period. Not only it's a double-edged sword, because at the same way it decentralizes Kiev, it focuses on other regions. It said that, oh, it was all of us, and it avoids at maximum from Kiev to Muscovy, but at the same time, it also still takes away Rus from Ukraine. And again, it's a very hard subject that I still need to research more. And I took a lot of the time already, so I'd like to end this talk by here. Thanks again for the questions.
Thank you, Leandro. Now I think Dina has some questions. Am I right?
Yeah, yes. Well, I have a couple of questions to both you, Lucas, and to Cesar. I think then you actually kind of applied this word leftist neo-medievalism to the Russian context. I think this would be very appropriate in relation to the American context, because there has been, and they will certainly continue, there has been several attempts by the American left to reappropriate new medieval discourse and to reappropriate new medievalism and medievalism. Because in America, as you know, it's mainly kind of right-wing, extreme right, kind of pro-fascist, kind of neo-fascist, white kind of, extremist discourse. And I have to say, at least it seems to me, that there's intellectuals' attempts and, initiatives to reappropriate the Middle Ages are failing. And so the question I would like to address to you and to Cesar is, do you think there is something in the Middle Ages itself that it always provokes and attracts racist, xenophobic, misogynist, and anti-democratic discourse? And anti-democratics would take the top on my list. And that's my first question. My next question, so I don't believe in the existence of good medievalism. that's neo-medievalism. And I would like also to mention that there are major conceptual differences embedded in the history of concepts, medievalism and neo-medievalism, which kind of restrict our application of those terms. My curiosity question is to Kostya. Kostya, if it's indiscreet, just don't answer. But I wonder how Medinsky, who was and remains the engineer of the new medieval memory politics in Russia, has he ever reacted, or his proxy, has they ever kind of tried to appropriate what you're doing, or influence or interact with you? It's, once again, it's just a curiosity question, so feel free not to answer.
Leandro, you first or Kostya?
I can.
I don't know, I can go first since I can, but I think she also asked you, Lucas. Well, about the good medievalism, I understand, well, not on the political side, I can see your point and I can agree. Every political medievalism is bad to some sort. But if I understand medievalism as any kind of appropriation, conscious or unconscious, of what they perceive as the Middle Ages or what, I can say that there is positive, there is good medievalism. If for example, I consider historiography as medievalism, historiography about Middle Ages as medievalism. Again, it's a conceptual. Unless we are talking like Sylvian's Guggenheim, Aristotle Mont Saint Michel, which was made just to justify why the French should hate the Muslims come, because, we got all of our knowledge of Plato and Aristotle from Byzantium and not the Muslims, because the Muslims were nocive and negative. Or, for example, even if unconsciously, by Henri Pirène's thesis that these Muslims are negative, they prevented the advancement of Europe and things like that. This is just a spoiler of something that I'm going to talk about tomorrow, but it will be in Portuguese, but yes, if you want to. So, yeah, political, yes, I feel bad. But I believe that is good medievalism. If we broaden the term a bit, if we go out of the political sphere and we broaden to any appropriation of Middle Ages, I believe historiography is good, or else I would be a really hypocrite because I am a medievalist myself. And there is also uses of medievalism by groups who are trying to, I'm going to pass this ball to Luis. He will correct me if I'm wrong, and I probably am. But there are some movements of the left or the liberal, whatever you call, although there are different said, which is the daughters of the witches that were not burned. Of course, they are a movement for the emancipation of women, and of course they are using this image, this new image of the old medieval witch, but they're using it as a resistance. I think that can be good, but we are so overcharged with bad medievalism, and it's really the low-hanging fruit of all the far-right ideologies that it becomes a bit hard to see. I hope that I answered you satisfactorily.
Now, Kostya, please. Luis, do you want to?
Yeah.
If I may,
Kostya.
just want to make one clarification. When I use the word medievalism, there is the trend in historiography studies of the Middle Ages that's completely out of, I believe, consideration of this round table, right? They speak of medievalism as reappropriations of the Middle Ages in contemporary culture, in the sense of, Walkman and his kind of crowd, and they can talk about new medievalism. especially as developed by Umberto Eco, but I would leave, historiography, kind of studies of the Middle Ages out of this for the sake of clarity.
I'd just like to
thank you.
here, because since Leandro threw me under the bus by mentioning my name, it's just that on one hand, yeah, I think I do agree that I would classify historiography as medievalism, but understanding what Dina is saying here, it would be what I would agree with her that political medievalism is always bad. Like, I don't think there is something inherently bad in medievalism as historiography, or medievalism perhaps in fiction, although that's debatable, or like medieval memes or whatever. But I think when those cross with politics, and then we have political medievalism, especially political neo-medievalism, in my opinion, at least here in Brazil, and a place where the standard Middle Ages never happened, that's potentially dangerous. It might be like something good might come out of it. And you mentioned the idea of the witch identity, and yeah, something good does come out of it. It's talking about empowering women, etc., etc., etc. But it's still rotten at the core, because give those people enough rope and they will tie their necks in white supremacy by, yeah, we are descendants of the Celtic witches, and eventually something nasty will come out of that. So I may be overly skeptical, but I agree with Dina. No, nothing good will come out from political medievalism in the end.
And actually nothing for centuries.
Okay. Well, just to be clear and to defend myself, I didn't use the term good medievalism at any point, or even left-wing medievalism per se. I just said that I was talking about medievalistic representations in art itself, like literature and cinema specifically, and an attempt to maybe fight fire with fire, to mock these medievalistic representations by Sorokin and by Eisenstein and by Longin, and the attempt by, back then in the 19th century, by Lermontov to create an alternative medievalistic approach to the history of Russia. But Kostya, I think you didn't answer Dino's question.
Oh yeah.
Would you be so kind?
Yeah. Hopefully I have no contacts with Vladimir Medinsky, as yes, he's really probably the leader of Russian historical propaganda nowadays, and I don't think that he's an architect. I really don't believe that there is some kind of a building of Russian Putin's historical. There is no Putin's historical building, I think, but there is some reaction for something. He have read something, and then I very like the idea of, I guess it was said by Professor Ivan Kurila, who said that Putin, yes, Putin read some historical books and then he attacked Ukraine. But if he read another historical books, if these were good historical books, he would also attack Ukraine. But his justification for it wasn't a bit different. And unfortunately, I think that this is the idea, and there is no such thing as some kind of strategy or something like that. Excuse me. And I must say that I'm totally agree with Luis and his point about witches and women's empowerment. So I think that it's a good point about something that we can call a good medievalism, because yes, this witcher story and modern feminism, I think that it's very interesting, and it has some positive impact, but the witch hunting and witch trials, that was an awful event in the past of Europe. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kostya. Do we have questions from the audience? Anyone?
Just a reminder, if you have a question, you can either type it on chat, type it on the Q&A box, or raise your hand. There's a button for that.
Raise hand.
If you raise your hand, we will promote you so you can ask your question verbally. And you can also type your question in Portuguese or Spanish, and we will translate it.
And in Russian, if you have some questions in Russian. Do we still have questions from one another?
I have
in the
some.
meantime?
I have some if I'm allowed. I'll try to be really brief because it's already in Brazil 11:15. I have two questions for Dina, sorry. And one of these questions is the same one that I would ask to Kostya because it's more curiosity. So I'm gonna start with this general one. Both of you talked about the church, although briefly, Dina talked about the idea of Holy Rush, and Kostya talked about how he was persecuted by the church once, which is, man, I'm so sorry. And I think we are seeing this neo-medievalism, this religious political neo-medievalism in Russia, especially from Patriarch Kirill, who, among his really questionable speeches, he talked, Ukraine is being invaded because there is a lot of gay people in Ukraine. He said that. Even a friend of mine that is Orthodox, that is kind of pro-Russia, even he could not think this word. So yeah, I want to ask this curiosity, how do you fit religion into for Dina, the political medievalism, and for Kostya, this public history medievalism? And the other question for Dina, I'm going to return to a point that Lucas has talked about, and again, more of curiosity, Lucas talked about Novgorod, and Novgorod is still, Velik at least, is treated as, this is democracy. We were a republic. We were the apex of our civilization. And I'd like to ask you, Dina, if there is any rhetoric about a Novgorodian past in this Russian medievalism, if perhaps the Novgorodian Republic is the true answer to a Western concept of democracy, or if the main focus, or they only think about the Tsarist and the Stalinist political means, if there is no place for Novgorod to exist in this pervasive political compass. Thank you very much. I hope that I made myself clear.
Well, maybe let me just begin by answering your questions. First of all, Russian Orthodox Church, and especially Russian Orthodox sects, the extremist Russian sects, such as Tsari Bozhaya, for example, to which Tikhon kind of gravitates toward, and it looks like that Kirill, given how much he kind of participated in the promotion of Ivan the Terrible and canonization of Ivan the Terrible, is very central to this Tsari Bozhaya kind of Tsar-loving or Tsar-worshippers sect is very central. So those sects are not just religious movement, this is also a social movement. Those people live according to Oprichnina rules. They want to re-establish Oprichnina in Russia. That's their kind of everyday life and their political goals. So it's both a religious project and it's also a political project. So yeah, it's political and cultural influence of the sects that kind of promote new medieval ideology, the return back to the Middle Ages kind of thing, and of course promote the necessity of Oprichnina as state terror, is very central to me than I think about Russian neo-medievalism. As far as Novgorod is concerned, it's a legitimate question from the historical point of view. It has, of course, nothing to do with the Kremlin and its proxies politics insofar as they go on their high horse, fighting for their neo-medieval Russia's future. From their point of view, Alexander Nevsky, who was actually a Novgorodian ruler, he has entirely nothing to do with this democracy. Then they promote the cult of Alexander Nevsky. They have, I'm so sorry, I have to open the door for my daughter. Yes, then they promote Alexander Nevsky. They completely separated from the idea of democracy in Russia. I'm very sorry.
Maybe Kostya now?
Yeah, I can say some words about the Orthodox Church and the Russian historical politics. And first of all, I think that it's important that there are, as in Russian politics and in Russian church politics, there are a lot of actors, and we can't say that the Orthodox Church it's a unique body. But there are many people, and there are some priests who say that the war is bad and we shouldn't start this war, we should end this war. And they were punished for their anti-war position. And, but of course, Patriarch Kirill is the most important actor here. And I think that during his reign, Church participated a lot in Russian historical politics. They organized and participated in the construction of the temple of Russian military forces in Kubinka. It's a new, huge church with a lot of images on its wall with who says that Russian army is the best army and the saints like Russian army and they support it. And they helped Russia, and it's a kind of an alliance between Russian Orthodox Church and and Russian army. And they also used many historical narratives. I wasn't in that church. I want to come there and see it, but they use the historical narratives also from medieval Russia. I guess I need to Google it. And the last thing I want to say about these actors, Dina mentioned Tikhon Shevkunov, I guess he's bishop now, but in 2008, when Putin nominal presidency was over, he made a film, a Byzantine lesson, where he proved the idea that Byzantine Empire was great only when their rulers ruled for 20 years, 30 years and more. And when they ruled for 8 years, it wasn't not so good for the empire. And Byzantine Empire was great only when it have some confrontation with the West and so on. This film wasn't about Byzantine Empire, it was all about Russia. And nowadays I just remembered it's a bit terrifying nowadays to think about it, but it was a part with when Tikhon said about rebellious provinces, about Bulgaria and Serbia, and they were colored on a map in the colors of Ukrainian flag. It was, yes, in 2008, it was a kind of a parallel, and nowadays it looks, I think about, and it scares me a little bit. Yeah.
Kostya, I cannot resist. I have to add something. If you look at this whole kind of exploitation of the representations of the Russian Middle Ages in Putin's politics, I mean, it's not only Kremlin, it's also the much broader kind of Russian far-right discourse. it goes back to 2005, in my estimation, 2004. Basically, you know, Yuri's first pamphlet, Крепость России, it's 2004, and it already summarizes what was happening since the early kind of 90s. But under Yeltsin, it was very clandestine. It just popped up under Putin. I'm not saying he came up with this politics. I don't think he has enough brain to do this, but there were people around who kind of put in his mind, little mind, fed into him all those ideas. And this is how, and were very active in formulating this politics. So I really believe there was a multifaceted, chaotic, but a movement which pointed at one goal: imperial Russia as a medieval structure and no democracy.
Okay, any other questions from the audience or from the guests? Any other final comments? Well, then I think we'll call it a day, right? So thank you everyone for participating. Dina, Kostya, Leandro, it was a great panel. I enjoyed it, and thank you for the invitation to be a moderator at this panel, and I'll see you next time. Thank you everyone, and good afternoon, good evening, and good night for those of you who are going to bed. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone, and see you all in the next session, which will be 1 hour from now on medievalism and media, and digital media especially.